Amal generously prepared an Amba dip with some moon, which is now circulating, so feel free to explore. It's a natural sequel to the sensory experience we had in the previous panel, so now we're moving to the palate.
Okay. Does this work? Yeah. So, finally, it's the Amba talk. So, the Iraqi version of mango pickle, Amba, encapsulates the story of how ethnic, class, cultural, and physical boundaries are crossed in the Middle East and beyond. Its potent smell, which stems from a mixture of fenugreek, vinegar, turmeric, and mango, although not in the case of the one that's being passed around at the moment, there's no mango. Amba means mango in the Indian language of Marathi, is retained in perspiration and stirs controversy among men and women, Ashkenazi and Iraqi Jews, Iraqis in the diaspora and the homeland. Its elusive quality persists among the diverse consumers and producers we encountered, who are reluctant to endorse it fully as a national product. It is Iraqi, yet of Indian origins, Jewish, but not quite, Israeli, but from elsewhere, consumed by some Palestinians as popular street food as a result of Israeli culinary contact. Amba straddles culinary registers and challenges the very notion of place-based authenticity. The origins of Amba reflect tortuous foodways across the Indian Ocean. The common urban legend has it that it was invented in the mid-19th century by members of the Jewish Baghdadi Sassoon family of Bombay, whose first encounter with the luscious mango led them to send barrels of it coated in vinegar to Basra port, thus confirming its role in the story of the Jewish culinary diaspora, with roots in Iraq. In Iraq, Amba was known on the streets of Baghdad in the specialty torshi shops of Basra. Often known as Amba torshi, it was part of a broader repertoire of pickles, torshi, for the Iraqi public. It was served alongside fish and kubat mosul. The strongest association of Amba for all Baghdadis was as an accompaniment to samak maskouf, carp barbecued on an open flame along the banks of the Tigris. Amongst Iraqi Jews, Amba had a special prominence. Ritualized into Shabbat culinary traditions, Amba would typically be eaten with eggs that slow cook in the same pot as chicken and rice in the most classically Iraqi Jewish Shabbat dish, tabit. For breakfast, after the morning service, the family would eat the sliced eggs on khubz with fried aubergine, parsley, and Amba. Badinjan wa beit tabit is a Jewish culinary recipe that would later reincarnate into the sabich, a famous street food in Israel which adds tahini and salad to fried aubergine, boiled egg, and Amba, and stuffs it all in a pita bread. In the 80s, the sabich sandwich transcended the Iraqi domestic sphere and became a popular street food. Consequently, Amba was increasingly used as a condiment accompanying shawarma and falafel, balancing their fattiness through its savory sourness. This process, which we call the falafelization of the sabich, established the status of Amba as a key component of street food across Israel's cities, but it continues to be a marker of Iraqi Jewish diasporic identity, with the aromas of homemade versions still permeating those households. Moreover, despite or maybe due to its apparent Iraqi roots, as a result of labor migration from the West Bank and Gaza in the 1967, Amba has been adopted in food stalls on Arab streets both inside and outside the Green Line in Israel, not to mention further afield. Today, in urban Israel, Amba is served in thousands of restaurants and fast food stands along with tahini and pickles. Some people even add it to French fries as a form of spicy ketchup. It features in an eclectic and hybrid appropriation of migrant culinary heritage. For the Jewish Iraqi diaspora in London, Amba invokes aromas of bygone days in Baghdad. Out of context and torn from the quotidian aromascape, Amba was redomesticated in the diasporic imagination as a symbol of the past. Consumed in the present only within the confines of the family and designated culinary establishments. Outside the Iraqi community, however, Amba is part of the gourmetization of contemporary Israeli and Middle Eastern cuisine in global cities. Our research follows the foodways of Amba and provides a history of its migration and reception, drawing insight from the anthropologist Arjun Appadurai's theory of value, in which the social life of commodities are tracked by tracing their flow as they pass through different regimes of value in space and time. We conducted multi-sited research into the transnational geography of Amba and the politics, sociality, and sensoriality of its consumption. Fieldwork consisted of visits to restaurants and producers, interviews with importers, suppliers, and customers, conversations with chefs and food scholars in two main sites, Israel, Ramat Gan, Jaffa, Tel Aviv, or Yehuda and Hatikva Market, the West Bank, Beit Jala, and London. In this presentation, I'll begin with the narratives of Iraqi Jews for whom Amba embodies a visceral culinary nostalgia connecting them to a lost homeland. I then pass over to Danny to unravel the Israeli context, where we observed Amba's evolution through distinctive registers of nostalgia, adoration, and recreation, culminating in its cult status today among many, mostly male, Israelis. Finally, Danny will illustrate its sensory journey to the global market in processes of gourmetization and the emergence of new Middle Eastern cuisines. Within all these contexts, though to differing degrees, Amba reveals three modalities of culinary transmission. Firstly is heritage, where Amba is operated as an expression of roots or identity. Secondly is connectivity, where Amba is universal without claiming roots. And finally, Amba is an empty signifier, where it becomes a commodity per se. So, London. So most of the Iraqi Jews who came to London in the 60s to 70s were part of the 6,000 who stayed behind after the 1951 dramatic exile of around 120,000 Jews to Israel. As we've seen, many of them continued to live prosperous cosmopolitan lifestyles until 1963, when the Ba'ath Party came to power and a pan-Arab vision subjugated inclusive versions of Iraqi nationalism. Discrimination and repression developed rapidly and reached unprecedented levels in 1969 with the hanging of 9 Jewish men. This led to almost the entire community leaving by the mid-70s. The extra decade spent in Iraq, however, allowed most of those who stayed behind to relocate to London and North America. London nurtured a new exilic culture of Babylonian Jews determined to maintain their sense of a distinctive identity. One of the most important ways in which this occurred was through culinary practice, which positions Amba consumption as heritage. The most common and easy way for immigrants to maintain a connection to the lost city is through the palate. As Rhys Taylor notes, the encounter with even the faintest of flavors from elsewhere or another time enable migrants to rekindle cultural memories, complete with a strong sense of emotional attachment in the present. Yet in the case of Iraqi Jews, where exile is often accompanied by trauma, culinary nostalgia evokes painful memories. Linda Dangor, who left Baghdad in 1959 as a 9-year-old and relocated to London after 2 years in Beirut, told us, "When I came here, I wanted to forget my past. I was un-English, so I didn't want anything to do with Iraqi tradition for a long time." Throughout this period, however, she continued to consume Amba and other Iraqi foods. Later in life, she wrote a cookbook, which begins with the words, "For those of us who have been uprooted and exiled from our homeland, food, like language and music, becomes that familiar space in which we can recreate a sense of belonging and a sense of community." Coming to terms with her identity, Linda gradually reconnected with her roots. Quote, "I found that I made peace with my past through food. It's an amazing thing. It has to do with identity. I felt that once you leave your country and you cannot lose your language, Arabic that I loved, and then you lose the weather, you lose the way of life, the thing that really remains is food," end quote. It is through culinary culture, we argue, that she sensorially and ritually retained a sense of place and belonging, of visceral nostalgia, even whilst conscious reflections on identity were seeking to forget her Iraqi past. Visceral nostalgia denotes a sensory form of memory that connects the body to place in the diaspora. Amba thus becomes symbolic of the distinctly cosmopolitan heritage of Iraqi Jews, viscerally connecting Linda and others to a sense of place and cultural legacy. However, whilst memories are thick and visceral, the practice of consuming Amba in London today is tied to the reality of displacement. It is this fear that informs a deeper attachment to culinary identity and the fear of its appropriation. A direct critique of the appropriation of Iraqi food culture was voiced by our very own Emil Cohen. Insisting on the authenticity of Amba as an Arab Iraqi, he rejects the moral and political feasibility of its appropriation. Quote, the Israelis. They are making sure that this is our culture. You're trying to find an identity, if you like, and associate it with this culture. So you bring this and say, it's mine. And if it's not mine, it will be mine. I'll make sure. In 20 or 30 years, it will totally be mine, and they will not recognize it. So now I'm going to pass over to Danny to discuss the development of Amba in the Israeli context.
With the traumatic Iraqi immigration to Israel in the 50s, Amba was first confined to the Iraqi Jewish urban enclaves of Ramat Gan and Or Yehuda. The history of the experience of the Jews in Iraq, in Israel, was worlds apart from their London counterparts. Facing systematic discrimination on arrival, many spent years in poor, cramped ma'abarot, though not without resistance, as Orit showed. The distinct smell and taste of Iraqi food often evoked disgust and became a vessel for what we can call gastro-racism. Many Mizrahi Jews internalized an odorphobic sense of shame about their culture and ethnic food in the 50s and 60s. This meant Amba would remain confined to Iraqi diasporic spaces for some decades. Indeed, during the 1991 Gulf War, when some of Saddam Hussein's scuds fell on Iraqi neighborhoods in Ramat Gan, the joke was that the missiles had targeted these areas because of the strong smell of Amba. In the film Forget Baghdad, we discussed, Ella Shohat recalls, one of the major ways that my parents, all the Iraqis around us, maintained their Iraqiness was by cooking Iraqi dishes all the time. I often feel like it was their way of sheltering themselves from an hostile world that was outside. They were expected to bring lunch to school that imitated what Ashkenazim ate at the time. That was a roll with chocolate spread. You know, that was something unheard of in my culture, but I was so ashamed because what my mother cooked for me in the school was a bedim amba, which is kind of a Hebrew-Arabic version, an egg with amba. And that was horrible because it did smell. And one of my first traumas when I went to school was when I was called Iraqit Masricha, which was stinky Iraqi. Yeah, and it stayed with me. Such distinct memories of visceral shame are almost the polar opposite of the rich memories of culinary nostalgia felt by Iraqi Jews when reminiscing on their childhood. Nevertheless, Amba did remain an integral part of the Iraqi Jewish diet, and indeed, the lack of availability of the sheep brand, which continued to be consumed by the Iraqi diaspora in London, led to a new phenomenon, homemade Amba. By this point, fenugreek had become an essential ingredient, perhaps in part due to the Yemenite-Iraqi urban cohabitation in Mizrahi neighborhoods, and the influence of their taste for fenugreek. At the Hatikva market in South Tel Aviv, where homemade kubbe with Amba is served in stalls, a delicatessen owned by the Ofer family, whose member claimed that their grandfather was the first to bring Amba to Israel, can be found alongside a shop selling delicacies owned by the Syrian Amiga family. In Or Yehuda, there is Little Iraq, which markets original Iraqi Amba. In any event, Amba today is not exclusively Iraqi anymore. So this is the Hatikva market, where you can see the richness of Iraqi produce and, of course, jars of different varieties of Amba. This is the Ofer delicatessen. And here are the a surgeon's perspective on Amba. So the paste, the separate mangoes that are imported in vinegar imported from India, and the final product. Despite Amba's growing popularity, a persistent discourse never ceases to highlight its contentious smell. Like alcohol, Amba is embodied material culture, which blurs the boundaries between inside and outside, private and public. Remaining anchored in Israel's ethnicized foodscape, it also indexes gender preferences. So, for example, in a widely read article in one of Israel's national newspapers entitled "A Week with My Lover" and subtitled "An Embarrassing Radius of Stink," an Amba aficionado confessed that he is deeply in love with Amba. His name is Michel Dor. I'm not sure he's actually even Iraqi, which I think proves the point. And he writes, "Who doesn't know the wonderful feeling you have when you sense the tanginess of this divine liquid that turns any anemic schnitzel to real gastronomy? It's the world's best sauce," he declares. The excited writer then goes on to describe his dangerous liaisons with Amba, which amounts to no less than conjugal unfaithfulness. "I was unfaithful to the queen," he writes, "who is my wife, minutes after she boarded the plane for the simple reason that my affair with the yellow mistress cannot exist on an everyday basis. Amba has tendency to exit your body days after your intimate encounter from every possible pore in your body, and in such a smelly way that you are surrounded by an embarrassing radius, and no one would dare to approach you, not even mosquitoes." This is the guy, he posted it on Ynet, admittedly a serious venue. The unmistakable aromas of Amba take a gendered turn in the story. Quote, "The smell is so unbearable to my wife that she put an absolute veto on my encounters." Amounting to an exchange of bodily fluids, the writer relays his negotiations over the terms of encounter. Quote, "A hot session with my darling Amba can happen only when my wife and I are hundreds of miles apart. I allow you to eat Amba, my wife warned me when she checked her boarding cards and passport. But 48 hours before my arrival, you cannot touch it. You will be sorry if I ever find it in the fridge." The distressed author concludes with a plea to the public. "Why isn't there a way for me to reach nirvana and eat Amba without paying the price for it days later? Please help. Any tip will make me happy and less stinky." And of course, there are comments on every article. And one reader responded to this distress call by labeling the writer a clone of my husband and added, "There is no solution for you but to move to India." Another reader confessed, "It stinks like a skunk," and added, "I smell pheromones of Amba with fenugreek in the air more than half an hour after a Yemenite, Indian, or Iraqi cross the streets." In addition to this transcendence, perhaps, of an ethnic food, which is the history of Amba in Israel, what we see today is also the upscaling or the gourmetization of Amba. So this is quite a remarkable figure, a Palestinian, an Israeli citizen, who is one of the leaders of what can be called the Arab molecular cuisine movement. And what he does is create Zahra Maqliya. You can see some of the descriptors. Basically, this is a tahini powder on top of some Amba jelly being one of the textures of molecular cuisine, covering Zahra. Another example, which returned Israeli chutzpah, is to take the Central or Eastern European concept of sufganiyah and stuff it with Morav Yerushalmi, an Israeli hybrid, and top it with loads of Amba. I haven't tasted it, but Joel did, and he said it's wonderful. I see you're appalled. I mean, this is creativity in many ways, and transgression. Sorry? With a question. And finally, Amba goes global. In the last decade, or actually in recent years, we noticed that not only that Iraqi cuisine has been stripped of its Iraqiness, some of the ingredients native to Iraqi cuisines are used as raw materials by leading chefs around the world. Many of them are Israeli, like Asaf Granit, Ottolenghi, and others. This is an example of the Barbary, a restaurant belonging to Asaf Granit's network, where you have octopus with another Israeli invention, Amba Lebanais, which is a mix of Amba with the Lebanais. I see an... can we vote? Yeah, people look for authenticity. I don't think you would find authenticity here. Another example is the Good Egg in London, serving the Iraqi breakfast pita, where you find kind of a sophisticated and refined sabih, of which Joe mentioned. Sabih being, of course, an Israeli invention, nothing to do with the a mutation. All right. Affiliated to a person. Mr. Sabih was a person rather than, yes. And finally, we can see the commodification of Amba when Amba becomes part of chain food. So this is Burger King, the kosher version, selling Amba Whopper. So in many ways, the globalization of Amba is coming full circle. Amba introduced from India through Iraq to Israel and Palestine, London, and now the global village. Recently, you can find at Trader Joe's Amba mango sauce, which I've heard Lital mentioned. It's awful. Okay. Let me conclude with musings on the place of food in post-national, perhaps, or a future hopeful Middle East. For Lebanese writer Sophie Shammas, who recounts eating Iraqi Jewish food in Dubai, the Amba experience invokes a bewildering sense of soft alterity. She writes, "We taste elements not potent enough to distance these dishes from our own cuisine, but sufficiently palatable so as to introduce another welcome instance of intra-cultural culinary diversity." In her search for Arab cosmopolitanism, dishes like the Amba salad, prepared by the American Jewish Iraqi artist and cook Michael Rakovitz, an Iraqi with an Ashkenazi name, allowed her to escape, if only fleetingly, the, quote, amnesiac touch of nationalism in the Middle East, and, quote, to reclaim a morsel of the collective memories that politics and history have denied me. I don't remember the Arab Jews. The Middle East has Alzheimer's, and I have inherited it, she writes. Will our palates save us? They, it seems, have not forgotten. Thank you.